Hi, Radu.
Hi, Ganna.
So thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. So let's just kick off with the question about your interest in behavioral science. Can you tell me, how did you become interested in behavioral science?
Sure. So initially, I became interested in it because I was doing marketing, and it was a very selfish way for me to become better at marketing. And I've since matured a little bit. I've become very, very interested. I've started seeing kind of cognitive biases and this kind of shortcuts that we take every time. I find them fascinating. I more often observe them in others than in myself. But yeah, it's just basically something that is it's been obsessing me for the past few years. So yeah, but initially it did start from marketing.
Okay, so I think the second question that I wanted to ask you kind of follows nicely from what you said. So a lot of people, or at least some people, believe that behavioral science is just some fancy term for marketing or digital marketing. Do you agree with this view or not, or what is your opinion? What would you say about that?
I would not disagree more. I think behavioral economics and behavioral science can help marketing and are very well applied in marketing, but it would be almost naive to think that it's just that. There's so much more to it. There's a lot of different applications that we can use in a lot of public health, for example, and a lot of areas that are much, much bigger than just marketing. So I think absolutely it's not just marketing.
Yeah, but like recently we had this case when the British government kind of used it as a as an excuse for the
Yes.
COVID policy. I don't know if you want to kind of comment on that as well. Is that something that you thought about? And do you think sometimes this misunderstanding that behavioral science is not just about nudging, yet very often what we see is kind of various companies, as well as in the public sector, the government, or policymakers, they often, I think, misinterpret behavioral science as just nudging. So do you think that sometimes could be damaging, or what are the implications?
Yes, I think occasionally you would get people that will try to explain something, and they just say, essentially what they're saying is, it's behavioral science, you wouldn't understand it, just trust us on this kind of thing.
Okay.
And I hope they know what they're doing, but it's one of those what you do is what you are kind of thing, and their actions don't really seem to sync with the ideas that they promote. I really, really want to trust them. I really hope that smarter people than us are making those decisions, and they're good decisions. But I don't necessarily think that what they said about behavior science is necessarily true, or they didn't necessarily did a great service to behavior science by associating those decisions with the field.
All right. So let's talk about your projects, and you have done a lot to raise public awareness about behavioral science. Can you talk about these efforts, and also can you tell me, why is it important? Why do people need to know these things? Why is it important
Sure.
to educate people?
So it started as a very random project where my wife and I were looking for a little project to work on together. As I said earlier, I'm a marketer, and I'm kind of a relatively technical marketer. So I like to tinker with little projects and little websites and little applications. And my wife was very interested in following this path if she can, or she wasn't very sure whether she would like it or not. And we were looking for a little project for us to work on together. And like I said earlier, I've already been obsessed with cognitive biases and behavioral economics for a few years. And I wanted to buy a copy of the Cognitive Bias Codex poster, which you would have seen around. And my wife said that it would look a bit too clinical in our house. We don't really have a place where it would fit really well. So then I was thinking about the next best place where I would get those reminders of biases. And I thought about building a browser extension. And essentially we built this, and it shows you a cognitive bias every time you open a new tab. So it replaces your default new tab with the definition of a cognitive bias. And we launched it early last year, and we hoped to get about 100 people to use it. We thought that would be validation for our weekend effort. And at its peak, I think it had about 3,000 people using it. So we were very, very happy with that. And it kind of led us to think that there's more to it. So obviously cognitive biases would be just a small fraction of the whole field. And while we don't necessarily look, we absolutely don't look at ourselves as behavioral scientists. We're just people that are very interested in the field. So we started basically looking at what are other topics that people would be interested in learning about, and what are other things that people should know about. So then we went and we built BrainyTab, which has the same principle, shows you a definition of a thing every time you open a new tab. And we did start with cognitive biases, and then we also added mental models. We also added dark patterns, and then we also added the behavior change technique taxonomy. And the reasons for all of this, because they're not necessarily behavior science, all of these topics that I've just described here, but dark patterns, I think, are used by a lot of websites at the moment, and I think it's important to raise awareness. I do believe that the more people are aware of dark patterns, the less likely companies are to use them. So I think it's important to kind of shine a light on those practices and kind of name and shame companies who do that. Mental models, as far as I know, there isn't any kind of scientific backing for them, but I just genuinely think that a lot of them are very, very useful. And I also think, and I can never find a good example, but I also think that some mental models actually help you counter the effects of some cognitive biases. So if you make a decision ahead of time, you're less likely to then make an emotional decision and things like that. So we thought they're really important. And then the behavior change technique taxonomy, we thought it's a really, really good framework, a lot of scientific evidence behind it. And we just really liked how it's laid out, where you have definition and the example. And yeah, it's just essentially what we're trying to build is, or what we're trying to create is a tool for people to improve their decision-making process. And I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we've got quite a few people using it, and the feedback has been really good so far. So.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of BrainyTab is making codex actually readable, because like I find this tool completely, I mean, personally to me, like no disrespect to people who develop them, the visual, I mean, the visual is completely incomprehensible, and it's just so small, and you can't really use it for anything. Yeah, so I think it's really great that the BrainyTab does the job of kind of explaining each bias separately. So that's really cool.
Thank you.
So in terms of so you talked about kind of for general public why it is important. Do you see this tool making a way into business use? And if you do, how would you envisage that? So is it important for businesses to be aware and to understand, how to use certain tools? So maybe sometimes they're using these tools without realizing.
So we hope that people who are interested in the topic will essentially start and use it without necessarily getting permission from the organization. One of the benefits of the extension is that in most cases you don't really need the permission from your network administrator to install it. You just install it. And eventually, I'm sure there will be business cases for it. We wanted to focus on putting it in front of as many people as we can. and we almost refuse to think about ways to monetize it or ways to turn it into a business. So we're very comfortable that we don't need to earn any money from it. It costs us, so we built it ourselves, and it costs us very little to run it. We don't really have an interest in turning that into a business. It's almost like a vanity project, if you want, where we just want to do something good for the people, and if we get some recognition, it'll be amazing, but we don't necessarily do it for financial gain. I'm sure there will be opportunities to do that in the future, but I would not want to force them, just because I think that thinking about earning money kind of clouds your judgment a little bit. So if there's a way that maybe a company, so we've had people asking us to maybe do some sort of white labeling version, or allowing companies to import their own content and show the content to their employees. And I think they're all good ideas, but I think it's early for us to do anything about it. We want a bit more validation, and we want to basically learn from the users what is it that they want, and then do it later. But the goal will be to give as much as we want, or sorry, as much as we can away for free.
Cool. I want to pick a little bit more on your public good efforts and ask you kind of maybe a bit of a trick question. I know you have recently built a COVID volunteering tool, right? So I want you to talk about that, so what it is for. But before you do that, yeah, I mean, basically the way I want to frame the question is this. So we currently observe this completely, orthogonal behavior. So we have people who selfishly go and basically wipe everything off the shelves on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have very compassionate, nice people who are trying to help others, right? So of course, the rational behavior is the first one, unfortunately. So the former, when you're basically behaving selfishly. So do you think behavioral science and maybe tools that you're building could actually swing the people who are selfish into doing something for the public good?
I really hope so. What I found really fascinating in this period. So up until a few weeks ago, you still had people very divided on whether this is serious or not. Mm-hmm. At the moment, everyone seems to agree that this is very serious. No one thinks that anyone is overreacting. But a couple of weeks ago, it was very much both sides. And I know people that were on both sides. And it was just very interesting to observe that the side that they were on very much depended on the financial impact that the crisis would have on them. So people who would stand to lose a lot of money from quarantining or self-isolating would say, this is outrageous, this is blown out of proportion, and so on and so on. And everyone else seemed to be like, oh yeah, no, this makes sense. It's like, this is very serious. And it's just a really good example, because none of those people are evil people. So people on both sides genuinely think that they have the best intentions and they are nice people. No one really thinks that they're horrible people or anything like that, right? It's just, this is a fascinating example of kind of cognitive biases or self-protection mechanisms, if you want, that you just basically, I think it's cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Where you, on one hand, you know that this is really bad. On the other hand, you tell yourself a story and you start believing that it's not that bad for your personal gain.
Yeah,
it's just really fascinating.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's an anthropologist, and she basically collects interviews from people now. And she told me about a case where she was interviewing someone, and she said, well, did you do panic buying, right? Did you engage in panic buying? And the interviewer said, yes, I did. And she said, why did you do that? And she said, well, actually, I've got plenty of stuff. I only went because everybody else went. So and it's just like, what do you do about that? Even if you tell people that that's not rational, it just doesn't make any sense. they still will do it. And then you have these horrible pictures from, I mean, it really was striking. I just, I saw basically pictures on Twitter from NHS workers, medical staff who they work 48-hour shifts, and then they go to the supermarket and it's like empty shelves. Similar, with elderly people, right? So, but yeah, so tell me more about the volunteering tool that you built and how you think it might help people to connect.
Yeah, so I saw, I think on LinkedIn, someone shared the card that was created by, I think her name is Becky Wass. And I thought that's a really nice initiative, very small, simple thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I just basically thought that it doesn't really scale. So I thought about a way to help accelerate that a little bit. And I essentially built a copy of that, but online. So it's a web form that you fill in, again, following the structure that she had in the card, and you offer to volunteer to people in your local community or to people all over the world. And it had a pretty good response, but it didn't blow up as I thought it will. One single person gets to speak to someone and maybe get a bit of comfort, or maybe get a bit of shopping done or something like that, I'll be very happy. It's not about kind of those huge numbers and virality or anything like that. And in fact, the one thing that I was kind of conflicted about was whether to build it as a separate website or put it on BrainyTab. And the reason I was conflicted about it is because I didn't want, so there's, as you probably have seen, there's a lot of virtue signaling at the moment. And I genuinely did not want this tool to be interpreted as a way for me to kind of generate leads or anything like that. So I wanted to build a separate website for that, and it just would have added an extra layer of complexity. And I thought it's faster to just do it on BrainyTab. So I did that, and I made sure that I removed all the kind of, there's no analytics, there's no lead generation forms, the email, the contact details that we capture, we only use on that page. So I don't do any marketing or anything like that. And I thought that's a good balance.
So the hope is then that the people who are currently, so like it kind of syncs with what you were saying, that it may well be that kind of panic buying and also the desire to help others could exist within the brain of the same individual potentially. So hopefully they will be paying attention to these opportunities.
Yeah, and on the panic buying, I think what some supermarkets started to do recently is great, where they actually limit the number of purchases. Of course, it doesn't stop people from, I don't know, taking the first load into the car and then going back for a second one and use a different till and so on and so on. But we don't really want to live in the world where you'd be policed like that. But if you, just like you said about nudges, right? This is a nudge that actually adds a layer of complexity in you hoarding all that stuff that could be used by someone else. And I think it's a really good start. And I hope, obviously, supermarket shelves, some of them are still very empty, and it's sad. I did watch a video of a nurse who finished the 48-hour shift, and it was heartbreaking. So yeah.
So I guess for all people who are listening to us, cross the street and have a check on your neighbor and see if they need something that you might have. Okay, so I want to also ask you about businesses. So you you have worked as a consultant for many different businesses and many different projects, and you actively engage in these public goods activities. So do you think it is important for business owners to engage or for businesses to engage in public goods activities, especially now, that we have this situation? And if it is important, then why is it important? And where would they start? Should they go and engage with your the tools that you have created, or do you think like anything goes? So basically, anything that they can do that would be good.
I've got a very controversial opinion about that.
Okay.
I really dislike businesses that start by saying, buy our stuff and then we'll give 10% to charity or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that I very much prefer the approach of people like Bill Gates, or there's others, where they basically went and they made a fortune and they built a very efficient business, and then they give it all away. So I don't think you should blackmail people into buying your thing, because then you're going to use the money for charity. And I've actually known quite a few business people that did that. They were in business, and when they were in business, they were in business of staying in business, and they made money very ethically. Very important detail, very ethically. But then they basically went and they did a lot of good, and that's the kind of approach that I really like. The one thing that I actually dislike about some of the companies dealing with the whole coronavirus crisis is our inboxes are now flooded with emails telling us about how worried CEOs of companies are and how they're monitoring the situation. I could not care less if a company that I bought shoes from, the CEO is worried about it or not. They should look after their stuff. They should look after the customers. And they shouldn't really jump onto the bandwagon to try to claim some empathy points. I don't think they should do a lot of things, ideally separate from the business. But yeah, and I know that this is very controversial probably, but
I don't actually feel that that's controversial. I think, the point that you should be doing, good things all year round, irrespective of whether you're in a crisis or not, is a good message. Yeah, we just so there was at St. Patrick's Day that we had very recently. I was talking to the people from Ireland, and someone told me this, that Bono from U2 came out again and said something again about coronavirus and how he's worried. And this person said, because they live in Ireland, and they said, but I would actually prefer that they just pay their taxes in Ireland too. That would be actually like nice for a change. Like, I don't really care about how worried they are, but I would care if they pay taxes properly. So I think this is a very good message. Yeah, and also, if you think about it, for example, in Australia, the supermarkets have this special hour where people who are less able to kind of go to the shops in other times could go. But equally, when we talk about, for example, nurses and NHS, I don't understand why NHS is not doing this type of stuff. Like, for example, my mom, she's a kind of a chief doctor in a big hospital, so she takes care of her staff. So they've got a program where they basically feed their staff at the moment, so they have agreements and all that. So I just feel there are failures at multiple levels, right? In supply chain, and so. All right, so my favorite question. So we're almost at the end of the interview, and I ask this from every single person I interview. So I ask them to recommend one book and one film. So if there was one book that you wanted to recommend for everyone to read, what would that be? And if there was one film you could recommend, what would that be?
Sure. I've got the example of both. So for books, one of my favorite books that I make a point of reading once a year, and it's the book that I've gifted the most, is a book called Principles by Ray Dalio. It has nothing to do with behavior science or anything like that, but it's just a really good, interesting book. And I really like it. I suppose closer to behavior science, my favorite book would have to be Alchemy by Rory Sutherland.
Mm-hmm.
I love all his work, and that book is fantastic. Albeit it's probably a bit closer to the marketing side of behavior science, but it's really good. And a film, I don't really have necessarily favorite films, but I think a film that I kind of reference a lot is the pursuit of happiness. And I reference it for two reasons. One is that it is kind of inspiring and is like never give up and you can be successful and things like that. But I think it's also the biggest example of survivorship bias that I've ever seen. It's basically, I don't know if you watched the movie.
I have, yes.
So it's obviously he became very successful, but it's just fascinating to think that there would be thousands of people that maybe have been in that position. They maybe made the exact same decisions, and maybe now they're in a much worse place, and we don't watch a movie about them. So yeah, it's just a very interesting one to think about. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for finding the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.